Welcome to the Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic text adventure games. This is the first edition of our monthly news format, Open Mailbox, where you get news and listen to it. And Jason, how did we get here?
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, when Ben Collier started this podcast, he was very clear that he thought that it should include news, that we should have a news segment at the top of each episode before we get to the appetizer and the main game. And I'll say I was skeptical of that idea right away, and I told Ben and Dave as much. And so we've had, if you've been listening to the show or have sampled the back catalog, you'll see that some episodes have news and some don't. And after 2 years of doing this, I have reached a few conclusions. The first is that kind of the headline item, no pun intended, is that Ben was right. There is enough news out there about, what I would call classic and neo-retro text adventures that it does need someone to report on it. And I will say that Ben was right, that we are the people who should be doing that reporting. Where I think that I was a little right is that the old approach, the idea that it was going to be part of a gameplay podcast episode, was not the greatest way to do it. And because again, if you've been listening to the show over those first 2 years, we've got the gameplay episodes, we've got the magazine, the interview episodes, and more often than not, we're in a situation where we are reporting very old news by the time you hear it. So we sat down and said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so now we're going to try this. So this is Open Mailbox for May of 2026. So we're going to try to curate a monthly report on the developments which get our attention over the course of that month and direct you to the primary sources and feeds where you can stay more informed, no pun intended, if you want to get your news even faster than this monthly installment. So let's just give it a shot, and please let us know what you think. We appreciate those of you who have been sticking with us from the beginning, or if you're just finding us because of this format, welcome to the Retro Adventurers. Our top story is on Zym II and Inform 6 optimization. Back in late March, Daniel Gaskell announced a new interpreter called Zym II. This was created for SymOS 4.0, which you may not be familiar with. I was not. It is a Windows-like environment for classic Z80 machines like the Amstrad CPC. That's not the most newsworthy part. The most newsworthy and amazing part is that Gaskell has designed this interpreter to take on the challenges that we face as neo-retro players playing these modern Inform 6 games on classic hardware. Some of the details are very technical, and we will direct you to them if you want to read up on them. But in fact, he's figured out places where Inform 6 is creating inefficient routines that get pretty chunky on old hardware, and is now automagically optimizing them in the interpreter. And even more importantly, he's sharing his notes and his findings, which means that other interpreters that are still under development or have yet to be created may be able to follow suit. We may see some Z machine compilers like the one that's being used in Dialog, optimized to avoid these issues in the first place. And in fact, this is already occurring. More recently, Frederick Ramsberg, who is known for PunyInform and the Osmo interpreter, he has also been hacking away at the problem. He's created yet another interpreter, Krebs, because everything in our scene has to have a ridiculous name. It's written in Ruby, but he wrote it that way so that he could find optimization opportunities. And as of press time, I was trying to get him to explain to me, who is not a programmer, exactly what was going on here. My understanding is that he's using this information to optimize the PunyInform library, and in so doing, he's found a way to speed up his PunyInform implementation of Colossal Cave Adventure by an average of 12.5%, which, as he pointed out, that's like real time savings if you're playing a game on, a 1 megahertz, 6502 base system, or a 4 megahertz Z80 or whatever. So we got a number of links to all of this optimization work out there, which is, taking games that have been created as long as 30 years ago that don't run well on old hardware, and giving them a boost without even having to go back necessarily and change the old code in some cases. And Nick, you've got some information about a friend of the show, Andrew Plotkin.
Yes, indeed. I was just going to say that for me, SymOS 4.0, I mostly know SymOS as a very strange host for a PDP-8 emulator. So that's definitely a deep cut there. Yeah, the hacking for this optimization is in a level of the Z machine / Inform layer called Veneer, which I forget where exactly it sits every time I look at it. So this is very deep technical advances going on. But yes, the Visible Zorker has hit a puzzler with deadlines. So yes, friend of the show, Andrew Plotkin, has continued his work into more of these visible versions of the early Infocom catalog, allowing you to see both the Zyl source code and the underlying Z machine VM instructions sort of flying by in separate panes as sort of debugger output as you play one of these classic games. And thanks to the generous support on his Patreon crowdfunding page, he's published all 3 chapters now of the original Zork trilogy to the public. And the next project was a visible version of Deadline, but there was just one catch. The archives for all this source code that we've pulled from various Infocom tapes and other sources were somehow missing the latest revisions of a couple of files, just a couple of Zyl source files that were used to build the actual final release of Deadline. Fear not, footpads. Zarf's reverse engineering efforts on the disassembled Z-code files have paid off, and his Patreon supporters should have access to the visible Deadline at time of recording. Farewell, Sergeant Duffy, and on to Starcross.
Yeah, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to say, like, if you are somebody who is listening to this podcast and you have not at least sat down and looked at his site, it's patreon.com/visiblezorker. I mean, he's been very clear. He was hoping to get to a certain kind of critical mass of supporters. He's not there yet. If you are interested enough to be following us, I encourage you to at least really sit down and really think about supporting this project. It's some amazing archaeological work that's being done on these classic titles. Well worth. I want to tell you how to spend your money, but I want to tell you to at least think about it. And I also want to continue to address our listeners out here. I want to thank, in particular, those of you who have been leaving reviews for the Retro Adventurers on podcast apps and aggregators. Apart from you actually sitting down, downloading, streaming, listening to these episodes, reviews really are one of the best ways to help other people learn about the show, because when shows get reviewed, they get recommended to more listeners because the powers that be see, okay, this is a show that people don't just browse to, they don't just listen to it, but they like it enough, they're engaged enough in it to take the time to submit a review. So want to thank both Pixel Cool and Magical Mike for your recent reviews on your respective Apple Podcast apps. And Mike, I am still trying to figure out how to work your summary of, quote, deep, chewy nerdism into our show's tagline. And if you do go ahead and review on your platform, or you can use one of the aggregators out there, I'm blanking on Podchaser is one of the aggregators if your app doesn't support reviews directly. But if you do put up one of those, let us know where you put it so we can shout out your review in an upcoming edition of Open Mailbox.
And we've got some new features for old hardware, as the program that had many people digging out their old bread bin C64s out of closets and lofts back in 2020 continues active development. Once again, a regular subject of this newscast, Frederick Ramsberg, has put out Release 15 of the Osmu Z Machine Interpreter for 6502-based computers, with version 15.5 being current at time of recording. The latest release boasts more intelligent use of plug-in RAM expansion units to page out lesser-used chunks of game memory, increasing the likelihood that any data the game needs is ready and waiting in that primary 64K region. This release also includes changes informed by a poll on the IntFiction forum back in February, which asked players to rank possible changes to the status bar when Osmu plays Z3 games. The new feature abbreviates the score and moves headings in the status bar on displays with 40 columns or fewer. The also recently released versions 6.4 and 6.5 of the PunyInform library, which allows game authors to efficiently target 8-bit platforms with the Inform 6 compiler, simultaneously added identical display options when targeting Z Machine version 5 or 8, as Z5 or Z8 bytecode has more direct control over the status bar.
Yeah, we could probably have considered calling this the Ramsberg Report.
Indeed.
More information for those of you who are listening. We've enjoyed getting your comments on Facebook and Blue Sky over the past couple of years, but we did get a couple of questions about Discord and realized that, yes, we were probably overdue to have a chat presence there. Thank you again to Gary Francis and the Interactive Fiction Discord, where you can now find a Retro Adventurers channel. I did post about this on, I believe, both Facebook and Blue Sky when we first launched it, but sorry if you had trouble with the first links. Discord has a few different ways to invite people with URLs. It's slightly confusing to me, and I'm learning, so we'll get that straightened out. should have the more durable, permanent link to our new Discord channel in the show notes going forward. So we will be there. I think we got at least 4 of the hosts, kind of actively participating in the channel already. So come by and say hi.
We'd love to see you. Spring has broken in the PunyInform century, as, speaking of PunyInform, Frederick Ramsberg kept tabs on games built using his alternate standard library for Inform 6 games. On the 9th of April, he announced that he'd encountered the 100th game since records began. The 2026 Spring Thing competition received 2 crime-solving games written with the PunyInform library and revealed them simultaneously. This may mean they're tied for the honor of being the 100th PunyInform game. The 2026 Spring Thing competition, which also includes a native Commodore 64 submission. Jason, have you played that yet?
I tinkered around with it a little bit. Yes, I have not played through it, but when I saw it, I did give it a quick look. Yes.
Definitely a possible topic for this show.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the 2026 Spring Thing competition is now open for ribbon nominations until the 9th of May, which is about a week out from this episode's release.
Yep.
Reviewers are encouraged to get creative with their submissions, suggesting superlatives such as most laughs, best poultry, or describing a game as the trippiest in the show.
And I know you were hoping that we might be able to talk about Spring Thing games that you'd played. Is that something
I mentioned it? Yes. I mean, it was just a possibility. I was looking at Spring Thing, and it's interesting that it's come up twice now because we have this 100th game, and then we also have this interesting C64 game. I think it's becoming quite a good showing for our topic area.
But whether they're the retro games or not, were there any that jumped out at you as well worth playing?
Well, I mostly spent my time playing the C64 game because that is absolutely up my alley. And we should probably leave that to a proper episode at some point.
Gotcha. All right. Another technical piece here. It's the Z Machine abbreviation generator. And this is an old topic that's been getting a lot of new looks as the interest in cramming new games into smaller and smaller hardware to perform better has been a big topic. So when you are a Z Machine implementer in IMP, and you're trying to cram, this vast textual world into, a disk size that might be as small as 90K in the case of the Atari 8-bits. You need to get that text crunch down. Inform compilers nowadays help with this by generating an abbreviations database. I believe Zilf has a similar capability as well. And that lets common strings such as "there is no" or "are you sure you want to" or other little chunks of repeated text to be collapsed down into one index in a table. The algorithm to find this optimal table for any body of text is what computer scientists call NP-hard, and the memory limitations on 1990s platforms were far less dire than their 1980s predecessors. So the Inform 6 compiler took a relaxed approach toward a good enough abbreviation list, but Henrik Osman's Zabbrev, not a city in Croatia, but itself an abbreviation of Z Machine abbreviation generator. It's a tool that Henrik has written in C#, and it's been used by PunyInform developers for the past few years to try to squeeze out a few extra bytes to fit into a Z3 file or fit into the right kind of target disk image if that's a priority for you to get it into a retro platform. Henrik defined the Zabbrev algorithm, documented it clearly, and he's been answering questions about its behavior over on the IntFiction forums over the past few years, and invites new implementations in other languages, which has come from user JXSelf. He released a version in Bear C, which is the same language that Inform 6 was written in, and therefore should be easier to compile on older platforms that don't support C#. Joel Burton also posted some quick benchmarks comparing these two implementations and found that the C version completes a given task in about 8.5 minutes on one of his games, while the C# original is at 10 3/4 minutes to achieve equivalent results.
Excellent.
And yeah, I'm letting you have this one because you take it.
Yes. So at the beginning of the month, we thought perhaps we had finally found the linchpin to Infocom's database strategy. Zilf maintainer Tara McGrew posted an incredible find at the beginning of the month, suggesting that her father may have come into possession of rare Infocom artifacts while working with Atari in the 1980s. Her initial IntFiction forum thread supplied photos of and image files for two 3.5-inch diskettes hand-labeled Zork and CS for Atari. as well as copies of never-before-seen magazine ads. One promised a family version of Infocom's infamous Cornerstone database, for keeping track of household tasks, naturally, and the other advertised a version of the Zork trilogy for the Cornerstone system, promising that, quote, instead of dollars, you'll be counting Zorkmids. Replies quickly cottoned on to this being an April Fool's gag, but readers who downloaded the disk images reported that they seemed to work. You can indeed boot from these disks into Infocom's Folly, Cornerstone, on an Atari ST emulator and play a game of Zork with it. Tara then produced an ad for, quote, Cornerstone for Cornerstone and an Amiga version of Cornerstone. Consensus remained very strong. This was a prank, but what sort of prank was it? Tara soon came clean, and in her own words, quote, I did not, in fact, find these discs in a box in my parents' garage. This isn't really a lost Infocom port of Cornerstone to Atari ST or Amiga. But it is Cornerstone, running on the Atari ST and Amiga. Not the original binaries running in an emulator, not some kind of intricate fake Cornerstone simulation. I did it the easy way, by reverse engineering the VM and building a new tool ecosystem from scratch. Right. So, no, dear listener, Infocom never released Cornerstone for the Atari, nor did they port Zork to Cornerstone. But Tara's insight was that the Cornerstone system also ran on a bytecode virtual machine, referred to as the Moo machine in archive materials, and that she could code up an interpreter for a new platform as easily as we do for the Z machine terps. Further, she realized that she could modify Zylf, her modern Zork implementation language compiler, to target this VM and then recompile the original Zork source code. The easy way to some, perhaps. So, you can download this new Cornerstone terp, delightfully named Linchpin, for Linux, macOS, or Windows, as well as versions for Atari ST, Amiga, and a limited Zork-only version for the Commodore 128 with an appropriately sized REU. The Moo assembler is named Chisel, and the recent 1.8 release of the Zylf compiler includes a target for the Moo machine. Perfect. No notes.
I think I understand now that you've explained it to me in real time. Amazing.
It was quite a week. It was an amazing period on that forum. Absolutely. So now you're going to give us the financials.
Now, one of the bodies out there that grew out of the rec arts int fiction scene of the early 1990s on Usenet is the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation, or IFTF. And among the things that IFTF does is it raises money and it takes grant applications and then distributes money to lucky and successful applicants. And in early April, they announced 4 recipients of their micro grants. These are cash grants in the amount of between $600 and $1,000 US to develop these 4 IF-related projects, which I'll try to quickly summarize from their post. Kate Bagenzo is doing a flat game making tool. This was not a term I was familiar with, but it says the project aims to simplify the creation of flat games, a genre that has a decade of history, most often associated with allowing players to view and explore an author's own drawings, often hand-drawn and scanned, collages, music, etc. Most of these games are either coded from scratch or use Unity templates, which doesn't quite succeed in making game making as easy as possible. So this is going to lower the barrier for artists and non-programmers to bring these visual stories into the interactive space. Thank you to Nick. I have a pronunciation, Drigoda,
I think.
Drigoda.
The stress is always in the wrong place from anywhere you expect in any Slavic language, if you grew up speaking a Germanic one. So give it your best shot there.
We'll call that good for a guy from the American Midwest. It is a Ukrainian language text adventure engine from Andriy, and it's focused on the specific needs of the Ukrainian language IF community, which hasn't had native tools. Useful features for authors, from synonyms and aliases to more Ukrainian-specific needs, such as streamlining recognition of different cases, prepositions, and forms of commands. Tabitha O'Connell received a grant to work on Twine in the broader context of the IF community. It says there was a period around 2014 where the community debated the increased use of the tool, its impact at the IF scene, and IF comp. The strong viewpoints in particular contexts made this a key moment in the IF community, and while participants can recount part of the story and the in-fiction threads are still up, there's little literature taking a closer look at this episode and contextualizing this event. So kind of a historical dive into a pivot point in interactive fiction. And the 4th grant is a new standalone engine built with Godot for making split-screen co-op interactive fiction. And this goes to Abik Hasnain and Adeline K. Piercy. It says IF usually tends to be single player, and multiplayer experiences are rare and lack specific tooling to explore this further. These two students at Edmonton's University of Alberta proposed to build a standalone engine using the Godot framework specifically for cooperative storytelling, focusing on giving creators a powerful tool allowing them to explore building split-screen multiplayer interactive fiction, which I believe ties back to McGrew, who also was trying to do a multiplayer networked engine some time ago. So all roads lead back to McGrew.
Right. It almost feels shame if you don't get to say keep circulating the tapes.
All right. And for our last article, I'm going to encourage you to keep circulating the tapes. The Interactive Fiction Database, which is another service of IFTF, it still really does not have all the classic text adventures on it that it could. One of my I'm bored this week of 2020 projects was to add a bunch of games in that I was frustrated weren't on there, but I've had other things to do since then. So you could help. Plenty of commercial games, let alone hobby projects from the 70s, 80s, and 90s are still missing. And as of this recording, I took a look. The very latest submission is the 1984 Acornsoft title Spooky Manor by Derek L. Haslam for the BBC Micro. So I think it would be helpful and great if everybody out there could go through their own collection or even just a short list of your favorites, make sure they're on IFTB, and if they're not, spend a couple minutes creating a basic entry so that more of these retro adventurers can be discovered by all. Well, I think that worked. But please do let us know. Drop us a quick note on Facebook or Blue Sky. Join us on Discord and let us know what you thought of Open Mailbox, which is an experiment. 2 years plus in coming, but hopefully is going to help us keep you up to date with what's going on in the neo retro and the classic research that's out there. Not all of which is being perpetrated by Tara McGrew and Frederick Ramsberg.
All right, well, thank you all for listening, and keep those news tips coming, because without the lamplight of your inquiry, the adventurer dies in darkness.
You have been listening to The Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic text adventure games. This edition of Open Mailbox was produced by Jason Compton and Nick Moffat, and edited by Nick Moffat. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, including Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Podcast Addict, and keep the conversation going on Discord, Facebook, and Blue Sky. The Retro Adventurers is based on a format originally devised by Ben Collier, Jason Compton, and Dave Hawkins.
Frederick Ramsberg